Kristin, you started, I think, in the BBC as a secretary, but then moved right through to being an executive producer, which is a terrific career, really. Tell me about how it started.
Well, the absolute starting was I was at Lewis Technical College, and a person from BBC Appointments Department came and gave a little presentation about working at the BBC. Her name was Pauline Noblet, and it all looked rather exciting, really. So I and a friend applied to the BBC. I didn't get in first time round, but did get in the next time I applied after I'd worked in a solicitor's office.
What sort of secretarial skills were you expected to have if you joined the BBC at that time?
You had the absolute minimum was 80 words a minute shorthand and 40 words a minute typing. I squeaked it. I don't think they do it these days, but I and my friend Nikki did a shorthand typing test, and she was fast and inaccurate, and I was slow but accurate. And I remember the appointments department person with her head in her hand saying, "I know you can type at 50 words a minute. You've transcribed your shorthand in half the time we give you. You know, why can't you do the typing test properly? Go away and have a double gin and come and do it again." So I suspect they probably wouldn't do that now, but I thought it probably unwise to go and have a double gin. So I went to the local Italian cafe around the corner from the Langham called Ponti's, and I had a cup of tea and a chocolate eclair, which was nearly as good for me, and came back
Sugar
and
rush.
did it. Yes,
Sugar
and
rush,
came back and
caffeine
did it
rush, yeah.
again. I joined the BBC in 1976 and went into management training, which was great, really, because everyone went on management courses, and it gave me a really good overview of the BBC. And although I knew absolutely zero minus, there was an amazing document called the BBC Staff List. So it was a hierarchical book of all the departments and its upper and lower echelons. So if you didn't know anything, you kind of pick someone out the staff list, look it up in the BBC telephone directory, for that did exist, and say, "I don't know how to do this. How do I do this? Or how do I book this?" And people would always tell you, because people were really good about, just not being precious about stuff.
So, did you go and sit in on management training courses?
No, but I did used to like watching the video arts, John Cleese, sort of little films that used to get played at on various ones. So I used to watch some of those sometimes, because they used to get played. They were actually sent on actual sprockety films and were played cine style in the management training room that was in the Langham, which is now a very posh hotel, of course.
Ah, yes, I remember the Langham, particularly the lifts, which were a bit of a risky thing to travel in.
Well, there was a lift, a beautiful inlaid marquetry, has a preservation order, I'm sure, lift in the Langham that was operated by a Caribbean chap called Joseph, and he used to take enormous pleasure as he operated this lift with lots of double doors and wires and wire gates and things in making it jolt if you were carrying coffee. The trick was to bend the knees ever so slightly, and you could damp the effect of Joseph just stopping the lift suddenly. I was on the fourth floor, but I think radio was down on the sort of second and third floor,
Yeah.
and quite a lot of training departments were there. I think radio training was there and office training was there.
Right, but you hadn't had any exposure to production at this stage at all.
Absolutely not. I had two bosses when I joined management training, Noreen Grout and Gregory Clegg, which sounds like a sort of firm of sort of building or solicitors. But Noreen Grout was great. She'd been an organiser as the manager type person in a production department, and she kind of moved over to admin and really enjoyed it. So she sort of infected me with the idea that admin could be a perfectly, justifiable and worthwhile career. And I didn't know whether I might go the admin route or the production route. So when I sort of thought it must be about time to move on, but I was there about 18 months, 2 years or so, I thought I'd apply to a production department and go and work in a manager's, they were called organisers in those days, in a manager's office, and then I would get a view of production and a view of admin, and it would give me better insight as to which side of the fence to jump. I applied to Sounds and Features and I also applied to further education television. And I got both jobs, but I quite liked the programmes with a purpose. I liked the variety that further education offered, because they did drama, they did documentaries, they did film, they did outside broadcasts, they did studios. Just it was a huge range of programmes, so I thought it would give me a good overview on different types of production.
But you're working in the organiser's office,
Yes,
so you had a sort of oblique experience with production. You didn't actually get into a production office at that stage.
No, not at all. But I did get I was part of the offers process, because I used to get to type a lot of them up. I used to do my absolute head in, because you'd get all of these offers, these program proposals, and the target audience was always defined as a general audience, and then would outline the very specific audience that the program was really meant for.
Yes.
Enthusiasts about tropical fish, or whatever it was. But it was a massive range of programs, because FE Tel, as it was known then, did everything from sort of cookery to making wooden toys to rebuilding your family house.
Yes, they were programs for a general audience, in that they weren't labelled as schools or Open University or anything like that, and they covered a huge range of things. And presumably you were at Villiers House in Ealing.
That's right. It was a terrible building, but it was actually a nice department to work in.
So how did you move into production? Presumably as a production secretary.
Well, they were called producers' assistants, I think, by the time. They used to be called producer secretaries, and then they got renamed producers' assistants, and then subsequently became production assistants.
Yes.
So I applied. There was a scheme called the panel, and that was like a sort of reserve, an agency, if you will, for sending people around the BBC. And I was assured that I would never, ever, no one ever got the first time they applied for the panel. So so I thought, well, as you never get the first job you apply for, I'll apply to be a producer's assistant in further education. And then the deal was that you got trained there, but you had to stay there for a couple of years. And I liked the range of programs, so I did that. And I did get the first job I applied for, which was, in a way, meant that I didn't get the trip around the BBC that I thought that would give me, but it did give me a massive range of programs to work on. So it kind of all worked out in the end. When I very first went into a production office, first of all, I was a trainee producer's assistant for a little while. So I trailed the producer's assistant on the Delia Smith cookery course. And a proud possession is a book signed by the producer saying, thank you and everything. Because you got involved in the production, and it was Delia Smith's first cookery course, and the one that stands up best, I think. Strong producer, you see, and it was all quite new, and there was, and so I sat trailed the producer assistant on the studio days, and I helped with the rehearsals and did some of the typing of the scripts, and generally was an extra pair of hands, but learnt a lot, of course. My first proper gig as a producer's assistant was on The Skill of Lip Reading with a producer called Bridget Barry. But I remember the organiser, the guy I had previously worked for as his secretary, saying, I'm really sorry about that. I know it's a really terrible thing to put you on, but it's going to be the skill of lip reading. And I said, oh yeah, that's fine. My brother's deaf anyway, so I thought it was quite interesting. I thought it was a very useful skill to have. Not that I ever learnt it properly, but yeah, it was a good one to do. And I was on my own, and I learnt things like you have to organise where the crew are going to have lunch, or you get taken apart by the then very union oriented crews from Ealing.
Yes, the Ealing crews were quite formidable, weren't they? If you were new to the game.
They were brutal, absolutely brutal. I remember there was a very famous one called Monty. I think he was a Sparks, and he essentially says, there's going to be no eating at no pub. I'm not going to eat in no pub. I'm going to go and have a 3-course meal. You've got to organise where I've got to go and get my 3-course meal. I've got to have the option to have my 3-course meal for lunchtime. You can't say we're going to have meals in a pub because we were filming in a pub. I mean, go figure.
Yes, the Ealing phenomenon was extraordinary. But you would have on location, you would have done shot lists and all that sort of thing. So tell us a bit about that.
If you were the producer's assistant or production assistant, then you would, it was film, so proper sprockety stuff. So you would take a note of the slate number and take number, and write down what the shot was, write down what the action was, if there was any dialogue, at least the ins and out words, or marked up on a script. That when in an interview, if you were the production assistant, for the sake of argument, we'll just call it that, then what I thought would be really handy was to write verbatim questions for which the shorthand was useful, and then do quick notes, phrases, if you like, of what the answer contained, because then when you are in the cutting room looking for some stuff, and I did know that stuff was looked for, obviously, then the director would have an idea about where a particular section might be, or where a phrase would be. And although that wasn't relevant for the skill of lip reading, it's something that I did all the way through, because just seemed like a useful thing to do.
Yes.
So you would also write down, as part of the shot list, whether it was any good or not. You would write NG if it was no good, and I think that it was good practice always to write why it was no good, because it might be that it was fine up to a certain point. And you would write if it was okay, and then you would write down, back in the day with filming on actual sprockety film, there might be a problem with a bit of dust or hair in the gate of the camera. So then you would write down that there was a hair in the gate, and that shot was not, that take was not usable.
And in those days, of course, film was very expensive. What was it, £100 for 400 feet, wasn't it? And that lasted 10 minutes.
It was. Yes,
so
a 10-minute
people were
reels.
very careful about what they shot.
Yeah, and they used to get really, every now and again, I would get, because it was a useful thing, if the camera operator's assistant was changing mags, changing rolls, then and we were carried on filming, then I would get to put the board on. I was quite like that, but there was quite a discipline about how you put a board on and what order you said things in, and when you clapped it, as opposed to an end board where you had to clap first because that was the most important thing, and then you identified, what the shot and the take was.
Yes. Should explain that's so that the clapperboard is so that you can synchronise the picture with the sound later on in the cutting room.
Yes, that's
so the clap of the clapperboard is synchronised with the picture of it closing. So, were you helping the producer by going to editing suites and things like that? Did you go to?
I do remember going to the edits for the skill of lip reading, and the editing was done in the basement of Television Centre, where in VT Area 1. And on the skill of lip reading, they actually used to put a click track on so that transmitters didn't close, because it was lip reading, so there wasn't any sound. So every now and again we had the editor made up literally a click track, just something to keep the transmitters awake.
So that after you'd done the lip reading program, which was rather eccentric in a sense, it was very different.
Very eccentric, even for FE Tel, it was pretty eccentric.
Yes. Okay. So what did you move on to after that?
I do remember that I went and worked on a series called Roadshow, and Roadshow had two prongs to it. It was a disco program, to all intents and purposes. It was like Top of the Pops, but an outside broadcast. Mm-hmm. And the idea of it was, back in those days, that it was to encourage the disenfranchised youth of the day to engage with training. And some we's thought that what we'd do is we'll have a disco program, and then attached to that with the same presenters, there would be a 10-minute information section that would go out on a Sunday at 6:30 or something. So there was Roadshow Disco and Roadshow Info. And Roadshow was brilliant. Roadshow was an outside broadcast in 12 towns and cities around the UK, all 4 nations covered, I believe.
Yeah.
And I remember working with a lady called Sally Kirkwood in Swansea. I worked in Dundee. We went everywhere. It was really good. And there was, I and another production assistant shared them. And it had its own routine. It overspent hugely. I learned a lot about negotiating with program planning, for that was a department that used to schedule your allowance of videotape editing or studio resources or outside broadcast resources. And I learnt then about, influence without power, because Bill Cotton, who was controller at the time, essentially said, there will be no more money spent by that program. It is not allowed any more editing. And so I would ring up program planning, and they'd say, we can't give you any more editing. I would say, yeah, but we've just got to finish this thing. And, well, what about if we just went in and just for a couple of hours, and so kind of wheedling bits of editing in order to be able to make the program, in order to be able to make transmission. And that was when I learnt about, on time is it on the machine in time? That's, tight to...
Crucial, absolutely.
Crucial. Is it on the machine on time?
This was outside broadcast. They are a very different animal from studios in a way.
Very different.
Tell us about the experience of working on an OB.
Well, I really liked it. It was further education television, probably by then renamed continuing education television, because that was a thing. And I'm not quite sure how this deal was done, but we ended up using the outside broadcast unit from the Open University, which was then Open University Productions, was part of the BBC at the time, which was the same but just a bit smaller than most outside broadcast units. I love the fact that in an outside broadcast you open the door and it's like a TARDIS. You can be in the middle of a field.
Yes.
And it's inside you're in a studio gallery and all of that atmosphere that goes with that, and then you open the door and you are in a field and it's blowing a Force 10.
OB is very, in a way, slightly surreal, but live OBs were even more surreal. Tell us a bit about live versus recording.
Well, I did. I went off and did a vision mixing attachment. So I think live is a bit of a badge that you get. It's a badge of honour in a way. Once you've done live, there's a chip that gets inserted in your brain that you're then set. You can do it, and so I used to. I wasn't let loose as a trainee vision mixer on. As a sort of main vision mixer, but I did used to be number 2 vision mixer on things like Newsnight in the early days, and that counting down to going live just stays with you, I think. And then when I went back to production, I worked on a couple of things, but I ended up, after my maternity leave, working on the computer literacy project on a series called Micro Live. And that was a live program, which was great, but actually was the first live program that I'd done as a production assistant, which I did not tell the director until afterwards. But of course, I had done live before. So I had got the live bit under my belt. I just hadn't done the production assistant live bit before then.
Yes.
So, and then that was for a 1-hour special. And then that can't have been too much of a disaster for all of the team, because we then went on to make, 3 more series, all live. And some of them, it then became a weekly programme.
Yeah. Now, if you're sitting in, say, an outside broadcast unit, doing a live programme or about to do a live programme, you presumably are talking to people at Television Centre. You've got some indication of what's going on the network at the time. How does that work?
My recollection that when we did the live outside broadcast for Micro Live, which we did up at the BT Centre in Martlesham, in the middle of Norfolk, and I think it was actually snowing, and that I do remember that we could see Network Out. I can't remember if you got Q dots. I don't know if you got the red lights, because leading up to a live programme, there would be, certainly then, I don't know if it is now, you'd get 2-minute flashing studio lights 2 minutes before you went on air, and then 30 seconds before you went on air you got the Q dots, and 10 seconds before you went on air the Q dots would go. And in the days when videotape machines needed a 10 seconds run-up time to be stable, you would run VT at minus 10 seconds so that the opening titles would hit 0 and they would be stable by then.
You better explain the Q dots.
The Q dots, if you remember, are they're like two little tabs, like a pause control logo in the top right-hand corner of the screen. When they're there, you look out for them on Network Out, and when they appear, presentation will pop them up there. And so you might see at home, occasionally you'd see the Q dots. But when you were actually working on the programme itself, presentation would flash the studio lights 2 minutes before you went on air. 30 seconds before they went on air, they would pop up this little, what looks like a pause sign, the 2 tabs in the top right-hand corner. And then 10 seconds before you go on air, they would take them away. And that was your cue to run VT if you needed a 10-second run-up. Film run-up, of course, was 8 seconds.
That's true. It was from a 10 on the leader, which was 8 seconds, wasn't it? Did you find it scary doing live stuff?
I loved it. Yeah, absolutely terrifying, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Job and finish. No edit. Absolutely, I really enjoyed it. And the greatest accolade I think as a production assistant was when a director said to me, I want you to be the production of this show, because when you are the production assistant on this show, it does not go wrong. You can't get much higher praise than that.
Great. Excellent. So you worked as a production assistant on FE programs or CE programs, but then you started directing yourself. I mean, up to this point, you were a production assistant, so you were sitting by the director, but also you did a stint as a vision mixer, you say.
I did a training attachment. I didn't. I have no idea exactly why not. I can posit guesses, but I didn't actually get accepted as a full-time vision mixer. So I did the training, which was 9 months training, and then I got called back by the department anyway to go and work as a location manager on Bellamy's USA, which was good fun. And I was fairly certain at that point that I wasn't going to be offered the position. It was a very trial course. Who knows? Anyway.
That's a long course for learning.
So No, it was 9 months. They changed it from a 6-month attachment to a 9-month training attachment.
Why was it so long?
Because it takes a while to get your hands in and to be able to be let loose. So vision mixing on my own, on lots of programs, but anything complicated, I would be a number 2. Who knows? It was a massive disappointment not to get through. To get through. It was huge. It was the biggest single, I think, blow to my career. Was, that was not going to work out, because I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yes.
But there were a couple of things that stand out as being some of the odd nightmares that you have in your career. I think most of them are in that vision mixing area. One of them was learning about cabling of cameras. In that, I did what we would call a 1+3 interview. That's 1 interviewer, 3 interviewees. Mm-hmm. And in the gallery, all of the preview monitors, which showed the output of each of the cameras, were cabled such that none of the interviewees and the interviewer were in a line relative to how they were in the real world on the floor. So none of them looked like they were looking at each other. They were all over the place. Now, that doesn't sound significant, but if you're new and you're trying to cut an interview as directed, you're kind of looking at the wide shot to see who's going to speak, and then, trying to see how it's going to go. And the director's helping, obviously, because they're directing. But all of the interviewees were men who didn't move their mouths, and all of them had beards. And
So you didn't know who to cut
I had no idea who to cut to. And the whole thing about, well, cut to the person whose mouth is moving. I had no idea. I could not see. There were no mouths moving. It was just a forest of fur. It was just ridiculous. It was absolutely, truly dreadful. And I can feel the sweat now. And the other occasion where you just thought couldn't possibly get any worse was I did a news night in the afternoon. It was the Falklands War, that dates me. And there was a special debate in Parliament, and the decision had been made, careful use of the passive, that what we would do is they would have an outside broadcast in Parliament Square, and then over the top of that we would put in, using the technology of the time, a Quantel 3000, a quarter screen of the MP who was speaking. And all of these mugshots were available in 35mm slides that worked in a slide scanner that was in the apparatus room in the engineering part of the studio behind the control room. And the director said to me, right, well, we've thought about this, and we know that the slide scanner is very slow, and it has 36 slots, and it's very temperamental, and it jams very easily. This was a known fact amongst all of the slide scanners in all of the studios. They were very temperamental, and they jammed very easily. But there were some shortcuts to certain positions in that 36 slide carousel. There were two banks. There was an A bank and a B bank. And what the director says is, we've loaded the slides into the preset buttons. So they had got all the mugshots. They'd only put in mugshots to fit the ones where you could press a button and it would go crangle, 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 ka-chunk, and sit on whichever one it was. And that was fine. Great idea, marvellous. Now, I had two disadvantages. One, I had no idea who these MPs were. I had no idea who was who. Two, no, they hadn't loaded them in those positions. Not at all. They had loaded them in, not randomly, but they just loaded them in the first 8 positions. So I eventually worked this out by going, I wonder if this what they've actually done is this. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and 30 years down the line, I would say it's a better investment to stop, go into the apparatus room and load them according to how I'd been told they'd be loaded. But no, I didn't like to do that. We were on air. It was live. So I thought I'll recalibrate, my list of what MP is what, on the basis that if they say it's number 4, it's really number 1. If they say it's number 8, it's really 5 plus 2. So therefore, what would happen is they would call up for who they said was speaking, the Right Honourable Member for blah, blah, blah. Somebody would say, give me whoever it was, let's say Hasseltine for the sake of argument. And then I would go, oh, well, he's in number 12. So that really means he's in number 2B. So I would then go to 2B because my code knew that would work. However, I hadn't actually told my number 1 vision mixer that was what was happening. So I was like working out where in the real world this was. And then she would then lean over and press the button that she thought it was, at which point the whole slide scanner would go crungle, 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 ka-chunk to a blank screen. At which point the director would then shout at both of us because I would be saying, no, it's not. And then, of course, it would have to go crungle, 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 crungle back, at which point a different person was now speaking. And then you'd have to live it all again. And that went on for 4 fucking hours. 4 hours that went on for. And it was horrific. And at the end of
Yes.
it, I said, it wasn't in those things. And the director said, oh, you should have said. And
That's
I
very
had
funny.
nightmares about that
Yes,
for
quite.
many a year,
Yes,
actually.
yes.
It was pretty
Yes.
horrendous.
Yes, that is a terrible thing in television. If you're getting yourself into a muddle, you just cannot get out of it. And yet somehow you have to go on.
In Pres B, which was a studio behind the South Hall Lifts and Television
Yeah.
Centre. It was very small. It was used for the old grey whistle test. It was really, really small. But it was used by a department called the Community Programmes Unit. And when I was vision mixing, there I was assigned to this programme, and it was all about benefits and what was available on the high street benefit-wise. And so they had a little set made out of cardboard on the tabletop, which was a cartoon high street with places that you could go, like, you know, the pensions office or the benefits office or whatever. And a presenter would, as it were, walk down this street. And the Pres B was such a small studio that the camera was, in fact, down the corridor in order to get far enough away. And the set was so small that, and it was obviously colour separation overlay is what the BBC used to call it, but what we would now call chroma key. So it was all blue screen. And so on the vision mixer, which was a really old mechanical type vision mixer that the BBC built for itself in those days, you could match in colour field to blot out the lights where you ran out of set or you ran out of blue cyc. And so I had set all of this up, and it was rehearse, record all the way through the day, which is a thing, whereas you would rehearse a bit, record a bit, go on to the next thing, rehearse it, record it, go on to the next thing. You get the general gist. 10 o'clock in the morning till sort of 10 at night, I dare say it was. Maybe it was a little bit earlier than that. Maybe it was about 8 or something. I don't know. And we'd got all the way through, and the director was a guy called Gavin, and the production assistant was a girl called Andrea. And we got all the way through with this presenter walking down the virtual high street, and my having to mask out the lights and mask in the thing, and he'd walk and all the rest of it. And fortunately I took decent notes, because at the end of the afternoon, the senior television engineer on the day rang up VT, who was on the end of a phone, saying, great, that's pretty well it. If you could just check the tape a few times and, that'll be it. And they said, well, what are you talking about? We haven't been doing anything all afternoon. We've been sitting here doing absolutely nothing. And the
Nothing had been recorded.
entire show had not been recorded.
no.
The entire show. And so, very kindly, the crew agreed to do an hour over. So a day's worth of chroma key was done in an hour of quick, do this, write it, do it, write it, do it, record it, do it, record it, do it. And we did it in about an hour and 10 minutes the entire day again. It was epic. And Gavin and Andrea are still around, and
Still
they have
around,
3
yes.
kids.
Okay, so you went back to production after
Went
this.
back to production, worked on Bellamy's USA, which was my first foreign travel. Discovered I couldn't speak American, and learnt about business, personal travel insurance, that sort of thing. When I shut my finger in a car door, and then was pregnant, so I had some maternity leave. And it was when I came back from maternity leave that I worked on the computer literacy project and Micro Live, and that was back in the studio, but doing live programs. That was really great.
Yeah.
Probably the best. I'm still in touch with most of the people on that team. It was a really great series to work on. But I did really love studios, and
Yeah.
I became aware that people thought maybe I'd like to be a researcher. And I thought, well, I worked in a public library. I don't want to be a researcher. Why would I want to be a researcher? I want to be a director. So I thought I'd better up my game and make people aware that that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I looked out for opportunities to become a director. The department, education department, CE TEL, were always on the lookout for new presenters. It had still had a really wide range of programs, languages, cookery, family history, you name it, sort of crafts. And so they would from time to time have a studio day and bring in people that they thought might make a good presenter. Got quite a few. Kevin Woodward was discovered that way. Talent spot for new presenters, but they would also give people the opportunity to direct those sections. So I thought, I'll do a couple of those. So I said I'd do one, and then they were short of something. I'll do another one. And of course I learned from the Delia and from the vision mixing and all the rest of it. I'd learned about how to block stuff, and I got feedback from the person who was running the day. Yeah, you did really well. Possibly can't work them that hard all the time.
You better explain blocking.
Yeah. If you're setting up a sequence of shots, or if you're doing a demonstration as part of a studio insert, if you like, or a section, if you're doing a demonstration of how to make chocolate mousse for the sake of argument, then you need to walk it through. You might do it for a drama set, you might do it for a sketch, you might do it for a particular sequence in a drama, but you would walk it through, literally stopping and starting all the way through, so that everyone on the crew can see what's happening, what's just happened, where everyone needs to be at the time from the point of view of lighting and sound and cameras, where things are going to be picked up from, where the props are going to be, how to think about the next thing that's going to be needed. And so you would then move on to, you would then stagger, it's sometimes called a stagger through, stagger onto the next piece, and then people would know, we need to get from there to there, so then she's going to pick this up from here and put it down there, and then the whisk is going to go on, so we need to tell her not to speak, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And so you would block all of the action piece by piece, and then the next thing that you would do would be to run it, so that you join all the blocked pieces together and you run the sequence. And then people get to feel for how fast it is, how much time they've really got to get from A to B to do this or that. And then if it was a cookery demonstration, you would perhaps then do it as a wet run. You would do it, and you would do it for real, as a proper rehearsal with the actual actions, with the actual sloppy, messy bits. And then it would be reset, and you'd do it as a real take.
Yes, because all sorts of things with cameras moving around, you had to make sure that the cameras could get from one position to another without running over cables from other cameras and things like that.
The art of studio direction is it's 99% planning and 1% speaking in the gallery.
Now, just tell me a bit more about how you plan a production. I mean, because there were planning meetings, tell us a bit about the pre-studio day preparation.
Well, you'd start with your scenic designer, perhaps. You'd have a set. So you'd have a floor plan, which would have the set drawn on it. And then you would think about where your camera's going to be, and where the action was going to be and what the action was actually going to comprise. And then you would plan where your camera's going to be and how they were going to be cabled, so that they didn't get into a tangle, because in those days particularly you couldn't go over cables. They were 4 inches thick, so there was no running over any cables. So you needed to think about where they were going to be plugged in and how they were going to get from A to B to C in terms of bits of the set and people and walking presenters and so on. So you would plan all of that on paper first, perhaps using a stencil, which would have all the shapes of the cameras and various other, sort of sound booms and things like that you could draw and then have on the set exactly what they'd be effectively looking at. So you'd plan your shots, and then you would take that to a planning meeting. I love planning meetings, and that was the technical manager, the lighting director, the designer. Sometimes the graphic designer also, not always. Costume would possibly be there if they were involved. Makeup might be there if they were involved, if it was complicated. And you would go through each of their areas and talk about what the plan for the day was, what your end result was hoping to be, and any particular requirements for the day, any particular technical necessities that would need to be booked, and your technical manager would get those planned in for you. And then you would turn up on the studio day. Most directors have their own little routine. Mine involved a jacket and a ham roll, and always going to see the set first thing, and just checking it's what you're expecting it to be. And then you would then go up to the gallery, and you would start at usually 10 o'clock, and in those days, I don't know whether they still do it now, but you would have the studio probably up until 10 o'clock at night if it was a full day, with 2 meal breaks in that time. So most regular programs that have a sort of regular turnaround, a weekly turnaround, you get into a kind of a rhythm of the week. Planning meeting on Tuesday. I would do graphics on Wednesday, like go and supervise any making of the graphics. The camera script would be handed in on that day. It would be typed up on the Thursday, program on Friday, for the sake of argument. That's how Clean Slate used to work. So I quite liked the planning part of it. And I do remember there was a sketch I did for an education magazine program called Clean Slate. On this particular occasion, it was a hallway set of a suburban house, and the action was of parents trying to get their child out of the door for school. I'd choreographed the action. I knew what we wanted. We'd got all of that sorted, and I'd planned the cameras, and I knew that I'd gone through the action virtually on my head with the studio plan, and thought, right, the logical camera to use is actually camera 1 for the master shot, the shot that will take me, through all of this action. But I actually need to use camera 4 because I need camera 1 to go off to this next set.
Yes.
And I remember on the day, the camera supervisor saying, no, you don't want to do that. You want camera 1 needs to do that. That camera, that's it. That's your master shot. We'll do it on camera 1. It'll be great. And I remember I nearly went with it. I was nearly that, because in the heat of the moment, I nearly went with it. But something in me said, hang on a minute, there was a plan. There was a plan. There must be a reason why I said it the way I did. And I went and got the plan out, the floor plan out up in the gallery, and went, no, it will be camera 4, and it will be camera 4 because I need camera 1 needs to be over there. Oh, all right, sorry. Oh, fair enough. It's just a thought.
Yes, that could throw you rather a lot, being given advice if you think that they think you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, it happened twice, I think, and that sort of thing. I always used to tell people that you need to be flexible, but you can only be flexible if you've got the security of having done the work in the first place. You can't just be battered backwards and forwards. You have to have done the planning, and then you can take someone else's better idea, but only if it's genuinely better and doesn't box you into a different corner. Yeah. The other occasion was when I was working with a presenter called Chris Searle, who was very tall and very broad. And so sitting down, he was like normal people standing up. He was enormous. And it was a program about literacy and about handwriting. And I remember saying, I need a particular camera on a particular crane, a mole it was called, so that it could look over his shoulder and see the writing. And the cameraman said, no, you don't need the mole for that. It's fine. I can get over his shoulder. It's absolutely fine. Absolutely no problem at all. And I let myself be persuaded that that was all right. And it was all right, but it was only all right. And to be fair, that cameraman came up to me afterwards and he said, you was right. That would have been better on a mole.
Yes.
It's the confidence to know what you need and what you want, but also the flexibility to know when to react to a good idea.
Sure. Now, working in a small department on relatively modest budget programs, because you got a tremendous amount of experience, but you, as a director, were presumably also beginning to produce, in a sense. You presumably were working up items yourself, were you?
There was a particularly good series that I thought was good anyway, called Clean Slate, that followed the magazine program called the education program. I made a film about what happened to your exam paper once you'd filled it in, so what happened behind the scenes of the marking and the examiners getting together and things like that, and I learned how difficult it was to write commentary.
Yes.
So it's really hard to write good commentary. I was working with a producer who was really good at it, but it was it's quite difficult to do.
You're right. It is difficult. It's like presenting. Presenting looks easy, but isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I went on a secondment, I suppose you'd call it, to Schools Television. Now, in Villiers House, Schools had the next 2 floors down from continuing education, but I went on attachment to Schools to help the chief education officer, who was sort of on attachment himself, into a production role. And so the idea was that I taught him about telly and he taught me about education. And we made a couple of programs, long-form documentaries for teachers about managing pupil behaviour, with a guru of his time, Professor Ted Ragg, and it was really interesting. It was good fun to do. We both produced it effectively, and it was a little bit more editorial. Inevitably, I mean, I worked on a lot of different programs as a studio director, and you inevitably get the editorial side of it just starts to, it's osmotic or almost.
Yes.
But probably all the way through, you kind of get a feel for what might work well. I do remember, apropos of studio directing, you were saying about how it looks easy but isn't, and like presenting, it looks easy but isn't. And there is an art to making it look easy. And a director that I worked with on Micro Live said to me once, the best director in the world is the cameraman on camera 4. And it's true. It's very easy not to be sitting in the hot seat and know how to do it better.
Yes, quite. So what happened towards the end of your career then? You were making programs, you were editorially involved.
Yeah.
And then what happened as you moved
Well, I got made redundant because despite all of my studio directing experience, substantively I was still a production assistant, which was pretty bonkers because that was about 6 years worth, and probably wouldn't be allowed now, but at the time you could be on this infinite sort of acting up type thing, and they were looking for redundancies for production assistants. So I went to see the head of department at the time and said, I might as well be made redundant as a production assistant. Why don't you make me up as an assistant producer, studio director type person? And was basically told that wasn't an available option. So as they hadn't used me as a production assistant for the last 6 years, I effectively took redundancy and thought I'd got myself sorted out with a career as a freelance multi-camera studio director. And so I thought, well, I'll take the summer off, it'll be fine, and then I'll get myself an agent, it'll be fine. And then I got a call saying, please would I go in and help a programme in BBC Schools department that was running very behind and was losing a key member of the team. And I knew that the key member of the team that was leaving was a producer, but never occurred to me that I was, in fact, the producer. So I think I'd been there a week and was wondering why everyone was asking me to make decisions before I worked out that I was, in fact, the producer. And it could only happen in the BBC. And I do remember going to see the head of department and saying, apparently I'm a producer, I can't be a producer. And she said, don't be ridiculous, you've been a producer for years, you just haven't noticed it. And so then I made a series of programs, which was a marathon of editing called Get the Grammar, which was grammar for secondary school, and it was indeed very behind. But all the sort of scheduling that I'd done as a production assistant and as a studio director, and they sort of said, no, we can't do it like this. And I said, yeah, you can do this, and then we'll do that. But it was right up to the wire. It was fairly heavy going, that one. And then I made several series of a series called Number Time, which was for maths for primary schools, and that was enormous fun because that was commissioning new content, it was commissioning animation, it was commissioning scripts, drama scripts, nursery rhyme scripts, or working with an educational consultant, which obviously I'd done before, but specifically in an area that I didn't know anything about, which was maths for 5-year-olds, and it was all really good. It was really good fun. Built a team, and then got a gig to do 2 series back to back, straight off the end of it. So my short-term contract got extended, and gradually it kept getting extended, and then it became a rolling contract, and then I went back on staff in late 1990s, I suppose.
But in that period when you left the BBC and then came back, did you work, and you were working as a freelance director, did you work for other
Never got to do
broadcasters?
it.
Oh, you
Never got to do it.
Ah, I see.
I was only actually absent from the building for about 3 months.
I see.
My plan was to take the summer off, but I mean, I barely got that.
What about this executive producer role that you ended up with in the BBC? That was quite a different sort of thing to do.
Well, I'd done a lot of series of Number Time, and then I thought it was a coming thing, this digital media malarkey, and so I got myself an attachment to digital media at schools department, but the digital media element of it, and I thought I'll do an attachment there and I'll learn about it. So I got actually to make the first website for Number Time, which was really nice. It gave me a kind of completion, if you like, closed a loop, and obviously I knew the content really well, and it was really interesting. I found it very different, but it was really good experience. And then that attachment got extended, and I worked on a sort of a more in-depth curriculum focused thing called Primary Genie, that was a sort of precursor to work that went into the idea of a digital curriculum. Anyway, I did that attachment and decided that I couldn't quite bring myself to have made my last television programme, so I actually went specifically, didn't apply for an executive producer job, and went back to producing and made another series, Number Time, but I also did some research into what teachers would find useful in terms of a new science commission, if there was to be one, and then a springboarding off that, if that is even a verb, made the series Science Clips, which was deploying the BBC archive, but allying them very strongly to specific science learning outcomes for primary, right through primary. So we made 36 of those, and I'm really proud of it, actually, because I happen to know that one of my colleagues wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole, because in her view it was making programmes out of tatty bits of archive. And I said, I'll do it, and made this series with a very small team and not a huge budget, and won an award for it. And also what was quite interesting is that there was a website that went with it, and there was educational publishing that went with it. I did always really like the fact that things could work together, so that you wouldn't have the website not relating to the television. I always felt they should have a strong identity together, and the educational publishing should look like it belonged to the series.
Yes.
And then I went on to do a series from scratch. At the time, there were SATs for 5 and 6 year olds. It was the sort of SATs at the rise for the 6-year-olds, year one. And there was quite a lot of political bad feeling about whether or not these should even exist. And of course, they now don't. But the idea was that it was revision work without its being called revision, and it was a series of English programs and maths programs specifically intended to reinforce, consolidate earlier learning. That series was called Starship, and that was radio, telly, publications, and website. And Starship also won some awards. So, and that was the term at the time was a 360-degree commission. It was TV, web, publications, radio, all meant to feed from and into each other. But of course, culturally, not the departments aren't necessarily going to say, oh yeah, I'd really like to do that. Culturally, some of the departments might say, well, I'm not doing what the person in telly tells me to do. I'm going to do this because I'm radio, or I'm publications, or I'm the web. I'm different. But it needed to have that coherent view. And then around that time, there was an opportunity to be a commissioner on the digital curriculum project. That was a massive undertaking to provide curriculum learning materials for every subject in the curriculum for all 4 nations. I knew that it was a one-way gate, and if once you went that way, you would really not go back to production. No. But I felt that I'd done the thing, and that this was a really good opportunity, and it really brought together the skills from telly and the skills from digital media. I felt that I had an idea of the cultural differences of both. It was going to be video heavy on the digital curriculum, and the digital curriculum was also laden with politics. It had conditions laid down by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. It needed to work with external suppliers. There were conditions about what proportion of work those external suppliers could do. And of course, you had to commission the content and make it in a very groundbreaking, distinctive and complementary were watchwords of the day way. And so at that point, you're at executive producer commissioner level and dealing with very high value commissions, dealing with a lot of external bodies and needing to do a lot of public speaking about said things and being able to do presentations to rooms full of people, which gradually I'd got used to doing over the years. Not everyone finds it easy, but practice does improve matters. And then the digital curriculum was called BBC Jam, and it was closed. It was one of the decisions made by the newly formed BBC Trust post-Hutton, and there's a whole raft of reasons why it was closed. But after that, I got a job as an executive producer / commissioner for BBC Learning, because that's what the department was by then called. And in an odd sort of way was a really good culmination of, I still did online projects. I did online projects specifically. So when Jam closed, I got the job of, became an executive producer / commissioner. And that brought together a lot of again, all of the sort of previous skills. I still did online projects such as the BBC Hamlet, using the David Tennant Hamlet thing, coming up with a matrix, love a matrix, of content that could be used in a variety of different ways in the classroom, or for personal interest. I looked after some elements of the BBC's media literacy policy and commissioned content for that, and commissioned new content that was designed building on the experience of Jam, but also the experience of Science Clips, and running the BBC Clips library and the team that was, and the BBC scheduling, because we still had some time to schedule overnight for schools to record, and commissioning new programmes for that. Either to be used as long form, as a long, say, 40-minute programme or an hour, or being able to be broken up into smaller, sort of 6 or 7 minute segments that a teacher could use in the classroom more flexibly, and that was a great job. It was a great job.
Yeah.
It is interesting. My father once said that all experience is valuable. Every bit of experience you ever get is valuable, and I think my career throughout the BBC really demonstrates that, because there's stuff that I learnt early on that I kind of still use now, and the stuff that this meant that I also knew about that when I got an opportunity to do something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. It's interesting you've got this interest almost right through your life, really, in education.
Well, right at the beginning, I really liked the idea of programmes with a purpose. And so I think, my career might have taken a very different direction if I'd got that job in science and features.
Yes.
But every now and again, I think in your career, you get a kind of crossroads moment where, you make a decision and you kind of know that that's going to set the path of things to come. But I really like the fact that learning, that as a department had, it had such a wide range of subjects, certainly then in the mid-70s. It really was, so wide. I mean, subsequently features and other departments in the BBC kind of borrowed off them, and when something got successful, they would, so cookery programmes, you don't see those in education anymore. But that's where they all were. They were all in continuing education or further education. There were cookery, there was family history. Who do you think you are? Comes straight out of that sort of, that notion. Click is probably what Microlive would have become. The fact that it had this wide range of subjects and it had a wide range of production techniques. I did from time to time think I really should move to another department. I really should broaden my experience. And then something else would come up and you kind of go, well, I'll send you that.
You are broadening your experience, yes. Looking back though, Kristin, what was the thing that if you could actually say that was the most entertaining time, that was the thing that I enjoyed most? Any idea?
Over my whole career?
Yeah.
I think there's, as a production assistant, no question, Microlive was brilliant. I mean, I learnt such a lot. It built on the experience I'd got on Roadshow, obviously, but, Microlive was everything you'd want to be part of a team, be part of that live programme, be part of a routine. As a producer, probably Number Time, because it was just such fun. I mean, even though Starship was great, even though Science Clips was great, Number Time was overall just enormous fun. It was a really nice team, and I built up a really good kind of rep of actors. And as an exec, definitely the last job was really good, because it was a mixture of online, digital media and telly all at once.
Right. I think that's it's a very successful career, Kristin. But you're still gainfully employed, I believe, in photography.
The hobbies have taken over. Also, free work is very easy to get. So I seem to be doing lots of committees, which is pretty stupid of me, really.
Well, thank you very much. I think I enjoyed doing that and talking about things that I know we were both involved in, which was great. So thank you.